Being live?
No, you can keep going. I just got to plug in. I just got to plug in my memory card.
Got it.
I got to do one thing.
Okay. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Untrumped. Two guys talking truth from two sides on Trump. Of those two guys, I am one of those. My name is Doug Padgett, and I am at the Peacedale Studios over here in fine Minneapolis, Minnesota, and joined by Adam Schindler, as you can see up in the new backdrop. Adam in San Antonio. So we're both back at home. Last week I was off in another space. So I think technology's going to treat us well this time. Untrumped is an attempt of two guys trying to understand each other around this Trump. It was an invitation that I extended, and Adam was good enough to take up, and our friendship has been created in this conversation, in great part in front of people here on Facebook Live and live on this podcast. And that has been to try to answer the question that I had: how could a person who holds values similar to mine, has Christian commitments similar to mine, is someone who sees the world in ways that I think Christian leaders should see the world, being one, could vote for Donald Trump as president of the United States back in November of 2016 and going forward. And Adam is one of those people. And he has been a gracious friend and guest to engage in this conversation. So thank you, Adam.
Yeah, you're welcome. I've enjoyed it.
Now, some people have asked me, well, hey, how did you meet Adam? He seems really smart. He's, he really knows his stuff, and he's been engaged in all this. And when I tell them, well, Adam actually not only was personally supportive of Donald Trump, but actually worked on and for the digital side of the Trump company all the way up until the election, then their curiosity really peaks, right? And yeah. That's when people are like, now that guy seems really, really interesting. And if you pay attention, if you're middle-aged like me and you pay attention to what's on 60 Minutes on Sunday nights, you may know that 60 Minutes did an expose on somebody who used to work with Adam, and Adam used to work with him running the Trump digital campaign. Adam, can you just say a little bit about what that's been like, having 60 Minutes show up anywhere near your life? Because normally for people, when the 60 Minutes people show up, that's a nightmare scenario. This wasn't. It was a nice expose showing about your expertise, Brad's expertise, this kind of thing. But can you talk a little bit about, for people who are just catching up, your engagement early on in the Trump organization a number of years ago, and then as it rolled into the prospect that he was going to be a presidential candidate, so people can get a bit of a frame for who you are and how you're operating in this space?
Sure, absolutely. I work for a marketing agency that for a number of years has had the Trump organization as one of its clients. We're a marketing, advertising, web development, branding company. And a number of years ago, we began doing some work for the Trump organization in a variety of capacities. And then 2 years ago, after he announced, well, not long before he announced, they asked if, my owner, Brad, who is a friend of mine, would build him a website. He couldn't confirm or deny that he was running for president, but could you build me a website, he asked. And he said, yeah. And, did it for $15 or $1,500 to build him a website. And, that's for anybody that's watching that wants a website, that's not what we charge for a website. But I'm getting some of those calls recently.
Yeah, because he mentioned that in the 60 Minutes interview, didn't he? That he had done this.
Yeah, and this is part of his narrative, right? I mean, that's actually what happened. And he's a business guy, and he thought, well, yeah, if I can get into this opens up a whole new market. So, I'm not going to make my money now; I'll make it later. Mm-hmm. So, I began working for the company and began working with him on the campaign. And in the early days prior to the presumptive nomination, when the RNC began to get involved in the larger digital strategy developed, the early days, I was doing some of the video editing of the videos. All the front-facing shots of Mr. Trump speaking directly into the camera were things that I had edited and created, and worked in that capacity for a couple of months. And then when the Trump campaign really took off with the nomination, Brad went and was part of he ended up being the national digital director for the campaign, and I worked on client work and worked in the business and did strategy and business development for our company.
So there's part of that story which then lands you in a relationship to the success of the Trump election in a different way than some other people. And what I've appreciated about our conversation is I've never felt from you that there was this extra sense that you had to defend that work by being a supporter of Trump, right? Some people, they feel like, well, there's always this buyer's support for the thing of whatever they bought. The guy who buys the sports car in middle life and then takes him 6 months before he can admit, I shouldn't have bought that sports car. Right? He had to spend 6 months bragging about his car. But I've never picked that up from you. I've never, and maybe it's true just because I don't know you well enough, but I've never sensed that you are defending your support of Donald Trump simply because you supported Donald Trump. You see what I'm getting at?
Simply because I worked for him?
Yeah,
or?
yeah. That you have some sort of responsibility on your hands. I've really appreciated that. I think it's been, I think it's modeled something that I think will matter to a lot of people who want to engage with other Trump supporters in their lives, to try to understand how someone could, do something that to them seems so off-putting. So I think your rich history is really, it really shows a sense of integrity from you, and I want to commend you
Well, I
for.
appreciate that. I mean, I most certainly started by asking myself the question, can I really do this? I mean, I needed to ask the question, I was asking it with the rest of the world. Who is this guy? What is he about? Is this for real? Yeah, it's kind of fun to be involved in something big, but is this ethical? Can I do this? And I had a commitment to do the work and to support my work. But it was a choice that I made, and I made that decision, on my own free will, based on,
Yeah.
So it's a journey.
And that's part of where I think our conversation will go tonight, is in the question of your continual support, because that's interesting to me, and I think it's interesting to a lot of people. There are a lot of us who have thought, people who didn't want Donald Trump to be elected and can't seem to wrap our minds around how that happened, that we have tended to think, well, the people who supported him, he made a whole bunch of promises that he's not fulfilling, like every president, but they're going to really have some voters regret on this, and they're going to turn away. So that's a piece that I thought would be interesting for us to talk about tonight. But before that, I wanted to reflect a little bit on what I was hearing and ask you if you would also reflect at all on what you're hearing from people in your world who are watching or listening to our conversation. Do you have any initial thoughts on that right away? What you're hearing from friends or internet people?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's some of the similar stuff that you were hearing. Like, when are you going to ask Doug some questions? In the same side, we never really got there last week to talk. We talked some about the Clintons and Hillary, but people on the other side of this issue can't understand how you can reconcile your belief as a Christian pastor, and thought leader with someone like Ms. Clinton, who supports things that they feel like are murder of unborns, people that openly say you can abort a baby up until the final trimester, and even in late term, that it's not a human until it's out of the womb. And there's some real questions. People don't really understand how you can reconcile those thoughts. I've gotten a couple of those questions specifically.
Yeah, and they're good ones. I think episodes 5, 6, and 7 are going to give us the opportunity for that. That's a plug for people to stay around. Plug. If you like this and you want to help it be possible, head over to DougPadgett.com, and there's a link on there for my Patreon site. You can kick in for this. Adam and I are not going to get rich off of this. I am going to get rich off of this. All that money just goes to me. No,
I'm funneling it straight to you.
That's right. I'm
already independently wealthy, so I'm good.
The company has taken off. Success tends to do that for you. You hang around winners, Adam. You're just going to be a winner. I've heard presidents.
You want to kill giants? Hang out with some giant killers.
Here are the things that a couple of things that I have heard from people. They want to hear more from you, which I think is my family's way of telling me I talk too much. I've also heard people reflect that they really appreciate how insightful and smart you are. I think it's just something that comes across. Maybe it's the professorial beard and glasses. And other people want to know this question about regrets at all. Like, have you shifted your view now? You know, that seems to come up. But the thing that I've noticed in watching comments and listening to people is, even reading the comments that I'm sure will happen tonight on the feed, I can tell, or at least I'm assuming, people are working really hard to try to say something. I don't know. I can't tell how hard people are in trying to listen. I think they are. But what's happening is they're trying to say something, and people are talking from two such fundamentally different starting points and sets of assumptions. It is really incredible. And the thing that struck me in the 60 Minutes interview, which was talking about the campaign and how the campaign went and micro-targeting, I could sense from that interview on 60 Minutes that Brad was in, that he was describing the way the campaign for Trump's campaign worked seems so different from the way that I know what I know of how the Clinton campaign worked. And I think those two actually mirror the way that the people who were reached by those campaigns think about the world. The Clinton campaign was about systems and structures and people groups and constituencies. And the Trump campaign was about trigger point questions and topics that were of concern to people, and marketing at a 12 or 15 person level in a town in Ohio, like a real individualized kind of level. And I think that actually shows up not only in this election and how people think about the election of Donald Trump as the president, but I think it shows up in some of the more typical ways that conservatives or liberals think about the world. So it's interesting to watch people's comments and to hear them when they talk with me about their not getting it, why, still not getting it. That they're really beginning from such fundamentally different points of view that it's really hard to see each other eye to eye, because their gaze are just going in such different directions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've seen that, and I've made a point to read comments on your side of the live stream, as well as reading my own and other people's, and engaged a little bit with some of them, and because I want to know and try and understand where people's thought processes originate from, and I made some comments about how, what did we have to suffer through during the Obama era, and it was one of those questions, and I had been interacting with one of my friends out in Virginia about that. And I had texted her some things, and so she posted my text to her on one of your threads. Wow. And I was looking at the responses back and forth to that and was thinking, okay, part of my answer to that question was, well, what did the conservative aisle think that they had to suffer through with Obama? And some of it was strangulation of American energy and energy production, and some killing of jobs, and what people considered war on coal, and that, ceding U.S. sovereignty to things like the Paris Accords and giving some of that away. And sort of the response was, oh, so basically you're offended that we gave any kind of basic human rights to people for health care, and people stop you from willfully destroying the environment. I'm like, well, no, I'm talking about specific policy points about the Paris Accords and the way that coal emissions have declined in the United States over the last 30 years, and how we're shipping money over to other states and other federal actors that are increasing coal. And, I'm just talking about, we don't want to pay taxpayer funded money to have people buy pills that can abort their children at home. We don't think that's a good use of federal dollars. Not that people don't get health care or can't care for their own human choices. Mm-hmm. So it's just sort of like try and talk about a specific policy, and then it's an immediate response of, oh, well, that means you don't care about the environment and you want to willfully destroy it.
Yeah, and yes, and you can see that happen in all of us, right? You can see the rationale or the reasoning in any one of us about why we hold a position to support healthcare, or to be for a softer footprint in the world, or to be for coal. You could see how what the rationale they used to draw their conclusion, they then assume that if somebody has drawn a different conclusion, they may have used a very similar rationale and not found those reasons worthy. But somebody may have come to a conclusion about that topic for a really different reason. And if we don't know ourselves why we hold what we hold, And if we
Yeah.
can't extend to another person the grace to try to understand that they could be thinking something for a reason we don't know, we can really wind ourselves up in trouble. And I think what you've done well, and I hope what we're doing well in this conversation, is to try to get to the point of saying why someone holds a view they hold is as important as what is the view that they hold, because they may
Absolutely.
hold it or not hold it for really different set of reasons than you hold it or don't hold it. And
Yeah. And
that's just really hard to do and I would suggest people try not to do that in the comment sections of Facebook posts. I just think it's not normally the best place for that, but maybe it is.
yeah, well, it's hard. I mean, most people are binary thinkers, and it's hard to do nuance, in a few little characters. Mainly because it gets really frustrating after you start typing longer than like 4 or 5 sentences. You can't see what you're typing anymore
Right.
on your mobile phone. But and I think that really, I would take what you said one step further. For most people, I think that it's more important why they think what they think and how they think about a topic than it is specifically what they think. Now, the exception to that would be if you're in public policy and you're making decisions that affect larger groups of people, what you think is very, very important.
The only thing that matters. Yes.
Yes, it's very important for what you think and how you're going to implement. But for, the vast majority of the American public, we're not making policy decisions. And our influence in the world is much more about how we treat people and their experience with us as humans than it is about the ideas that we give to someone. And if as humans we grow up and learn to do that, and then not try and assume that we all need to be politicians and act and talk and think the way they do.
Okay, so I think you know what I'm going to do with that, right? I'm going to say, which I've said the last couple of times we've talked, holding that view that you hold and articulating as well as you articulate it, how could you then be supportive of Donald Trump, who seems to traffic in that as an art form? His ability to pounce and to divide and to pick the lowest common disagreement and try to go right after it. I mean, it seems to me that he's so argumentative, so catastrophic in his effect on everyone around him. It really surprises me. I'm like, this is again one of those places where I would have said, Adam, that's why I thought you would say, that's why I just couldn't bring myself to vote for him, even though he holds the positions that I think would be better. I couldn't bring myself, but you could, and you can still continue to support him. So can you wrap that circle for some of us?
Yeah, well, in the same way that it doesn't disqualify me from thinking that you or people on your thread or someone is a bad person because they come out with venom on the internet. For the same reason, that doesn't disqualify them from being someone that I would listen to. It doesn't disqualify Trump for me because there's other things going on there. I don't like it. I think that I really wish that he behaved differently. And I'm believing and praying to the extent that I can influence with my Christian worldview, what I believe is the power of intercession, that stuff changes for him. But that's not something that disqualifies me from being in relationship to you or any one of your followers, or disqualifies me from support of the president.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want to call him, I don't want to sort of declare him somehow bad guy. Unqualified for the job he's in, perhaps. Most certainly from my vantage point. That's the thing. I'm not trying to say my constant dismayed sensibility is not that I think, why don't you dislike Trump? My dismay is, why do you think that he makes a great television reality show star on a show where you fire people and you stir up drama, but it turns out that's how he runs the White House. That's how he ran his campaign. That's the thing. And this is what you helped me with last week, but I want to turn that into a question. And what you helped me with last week, in my understanding, one of my big takeaways was, well, there were three. One was, it really had a lot to do with Hillary Clinton as one of the Clintons, which I think is worthy of a conversation in episode 5 about tagging a person with their spouse. But the other was that this isn't only
There's a few revelations news that came out this week. Wow, that's a valuable topic. So let's do that.
Uh, that the rationality is not the only way that a person makes a decision, and there's a certain level of hypocrisy all the time when someone feels moved. That's a valid bit. And then your point that you made last week I thought was so helpful, which is, my words here, Doug, you're the one that has this overblown sense about the catastrophe that Donald Trump is. Like, I kind of tried to put on you on week one, I think, this notion that you have a sense of a theocracy because you thought the hand of God was on this man. And what I heard from you last week was, no, if anybody is doing a thing where you're making too big of a God agenda on the president, it's not me, Adam, it's you, Doug, and all your people that are freaking out. So granted that maybe I'm overplaying the trauma that there is in the country by just the election of a president, I happen to think it means a lot. I think it says a lot. I think there's a lot more to it that I think you and I might differ on that, the effect of the person who's in the presidency and what it means.
I think it matters a great deal. I think it matters a great deal to the culture. I think one of the reasons that Trump got elected was that he played the culture war and won. He went toe to toe on these things, and he's doing what I wish that he wouldn't do in some capacity, and taking on the NFL and making ridiculous comments. Defending himself for soldiers, and but he's fighting a cultural war that meant something to a constituency, and I think that that's probably more of why he got elected than the policies that he represented.
Wow.
And I wish that he wouldn't do that. I happen to think that some of his policy accomplishments and some of the things that he's done have been good, and some have been not good, and but.
Just a quick tick down the list of the good ones. Do you have are there a couple things for those of us who literally, I'm sort of only speaking for myself, but maybe for other people who will be watching or listening, like, which ones come to mind for you?
Well, there were a handful of executive orders. There was a number of executive orders that he has overturned that were Obama era executive orders. And that many of those things, you live by the pen, you die by the pen, and that people knew that was coming. And that's one of the reasons why Hillary was needed, so that we couldn't undo the things that Obama just did. And some of them were flat unconstitutional. Some of that healthcare subsidy stuff, it is flat unconstitutional in many people's minds.
But, yeah.
And so now he's undone that and sent it back to legislature to actually make a decision about it. I think that's good. He did some executive orders related to the COOL Act, which is something that Obama put in place on December 31st, that forced cattle industries and feedlots to not over-medicate their animals with antibiotics. But he didn't restrict imports of meat from other countries from having over-antibiotic meat. So he destroyed the U.S. cattle industry and didn't put the same restrictions on other industries bringing meat in. Trump immediately, 10th day into office, overturned that and required the same standards be for meat that was imported. That's a piece of policy that is deeply significant to U.S. agriculture, and it means a lot. And a lot of jobs are affected by those sorts of decisions. Those are two small examples.
I can hear the thread tapping right now in comments where people are saying, the cattle industry is actually destroying the environment. And this is the reason why Obama wanted to see the cattle industry have some restraints on it, because it's run amok and it's causing. Yes. Okay. So.
Yes, that's good. And
we
can talk about that.
Well, there are classic disagreements between conservatives and liberals, or Republicans and Democrats. One of the things we brought up last week, and I want to stay in it for a little bit longer because it really is the thing that's, I think a lot of us are trying to get our heads around, and you can help us with this. Trump doesn't seem to be a conservative, not even entirely clear that he's committed to the Republican Party as an institution. So he's not a Republican in that sense. But he doesn't seem to be functioning as a conservative. And I'm going to raise a point that conservative commentator George Will, who's one of the stalwarts of conservatism in our current day, raises about Trump and his people who think, or in his thought, in his think tank group, his brain trust is what I'm trying to say. That he's not a conservative. He's not really even a Republican. There's this part of me that thinks, man, Adam, you could make an argument for Hillary Clinton being so much more middle of the road and institutionalist and not liberal enough, where if literally, and I'm not trying to be sassy here, but literally if it's to the level of a policy change around cattle legislation, man, you can get that kind of win out of any president sort of on any side. And
you asked me.
I know I asked you what are some of the wins, but
and then you use it as like the thing that hinges my decision about the man. Come on.
Okay, that's true. That's true. I did. But what I'm getting at is those kinds of pushes. Like if that's the level, it doesn't feel like that's what inspired the thousands of people that came to his rallies or inspired people to convince their friends. So what was it then? What do you see what I'm getting? Like every time we go into one of these policy issues, it's pretty obvious to me, at least, or maybe it's just my assumption. Most people didn't even know that was a thing. So that's not what they were voting on, and they probably didn't even know he did it. You did because you pay attention to such things and you're a smart guy, but other people really didn't. So it doesn't feel like he was a policy guy that people are looking for.
No, and I mean, if we're looking to still try and understand why on earth people elected him, part of it was that he wasn't a Democrat and that he wasn't a Republican. I mean, very prominent Republicans came out and would not endorse him, and it was a mess. And the whole thing with Ryan and the whole Bush family wouldn't even, deign to show up at things. And I mean, it was a disaster, and for the Republicans. And I don't think he's certainly not governing like a conservative. He's acting more like a moderate Democrat in the policy things that he's deciding on and the ways that he's doing things. Mm-hmm. And some of the stuff that he was doing with the DACA law and throwing that back towards Congress, really basically not doing anything on it, not even doing really good politicking on it, that he could have just waited until the onslaught of federal lawsuits came declaring that unconstitutional that were sitting in the piles.
Yes.
So
yeah,
I don't think he's a conservative, and I don't think he's a Republican or a Democrat. I think he's a fighter for cultural things that Americans seem to resonate with. And I mean, I really don't know if it's going to be overall good for the nation. I think people are inflamed now. I think that it's painful. I think that it's hard. I don't think that things have gotten better since Trump came as far as the cultural narrative.
Yeah, and I know I pushed you on this last week to a degree that was undefensible. But your argument is that Hillary Clinton would have, as bad as Trump is, you're seeing now on some of these issues, are not fulfilling all conservatism or Republican imagination.
I'm not saying that he's bad. I'm just saying he's not conservative.
Yes. Yeah, that he's not as far away as he is from those ideals that you might have gotten from a Mitt Romney or a John McCain or something in previous elections. That Hillary, well, that's interesting. I want to know about that. That Hillary Clinton really was, in your mind, and so many people so there was almost nothing that Donald Trump could have been as a president that to you would have been less of a worry or a problem than Hillary Clinton's election. Like that, you had to make a choice between one or the other, and that helped you to solidify your thoughts on Donald Trump. Did I hear you right?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I definitely think Hillary Clinton was a bigger threat to what I believe would be a healthy direction of this nation than Trump's uncertainty and penchant for ranting on Twitter and aggressively attacking people that oppose him. I don't like that stuff. I think it's unbecoming. I think it's damaging. But I think the damage that Hillary would have done to what I valued in America, the things that are important to me, she would have done a worse.
Yeah, and I think, and I've said to you and other people who might pay attention to this who know me know that I was a Hillary supporter in 2008 and I was a Hillary supporter in 2016. And
I think the Kool-Aid for years, huh?
I've been drinking it for years. And I will say, and there's lots of reasons why I was, and not all of them were policies. She's not where I am on a whole lot of issues, but I had my own reasons for episode 5, and we'll stick around on why I think that really mattered and why I still believe it matters. And why, for someone like me, Donald Trump was so much the manifestation of the things that I thought Hillary Clinton's election would have been commentary on it, that it really is this juxtaposition. And I think that's what a lot of us are experiencing, is that same thing that you felt in this contrast that made it possible for you to focus on Donald Trump and find the things that you did find in him, because you were there was no chance you were going to move to Hillary Clinton. That contrast is the thing that people who are experiencing the kind of dislocation that I'm experiencing in the presidential politics, what we're experiencing right now. And that is, the contrast is so stark that, and I'm not going to make you defend or think that you even could or wanted to defend any of his past behavior or his way he treats women or the Access Hollywood video, especially in light of all the things of the last week, where women have come out so clearly about how many women have been so harmed by so frequently in so many situations by so many men. That the contrast of literally we didn't elect, and this is the tantrum a lot of us are still having some 10 months later, 11 months later, we didn't elect the woman. Instead, we elected a guy like that. And that juxtaposition is the thing that I think is staying in the system for a lot of us, is every time we hear him, see him, it's a reminder, yeah, this is a country that said that's our guy instead of that woman is our presidential pick. And that just seems to reinforce all the time. You don't even have to hate Trump. You could just see this contrast. So,
yeah, and I think that's interesting to me, that our primary question that stirs up our emotions is a reduction to a character for things that he said versus a gender of someone else. Like, we didn't elect a woman, which we should have just elected a woman, versus how could we elect a man who said those kinds of things? And so, like, I mean, are we electing a talking head? Are we electing a gender? Are we electing an ethnicity? Or are we electing someone that's going to actually make some...
We've only elected white guys until Barack Obama. So I think an argument could be made. There is a narrative in this country that white men are who we've chosen to elect because of
certainly evidence that white men got elected. And so what does that mean? So you look at the facts and the history, and we see there's been one non-white male elected to the highest office in American politics. So what does that mean? How do we interpret that data?
That there's been a structural and cultural bias in this country toward leadership of white men. And I am afraid, and I don't want to, in week 5, we can get into this, because I don't want to at all suspect that you would have to, that I'm accusing you of this. But I believe that there was an enormous amount of cultural racism that caused people to disdain Barack Obama as the president. And I think there was an enormous amount of male insecurity and continued male dominance attitude that had a lot to do not only with a woman, but with that woman. I think the argument for a lot of guys, I could vote for a woman, but not that woman, has a whole lot to do with the issues around power and male and female relationships in this society. Almost like, well, there's an acceptable woman and there's an unacceptable woman, and I'll tell you why she's an unacceptable one. And I think it has a lot to do with what we can talk about in week 5 if people stick around for 2 more weeks. And the reason I'm doing that, I'm not just trying to dodge the question. I just really want to make sure that I'm spending a number of weeks really trying to hear you out on what your vantage points are, and to help me and others to really get it not only inside the what happened, but why did it happen for people who were supporting Trump. I'm not trying to dodge the question. I actually talk about it all the time with people everywhere. So I'm chomping at the bit.
Yeah, and I would love to try and understand some of that. I mean, so you said that there was systemic cultural racism towards that prefers white males to be in power. and that's why, you know, people just were loathsome to support President Obama. I mean, is there, what sort of, other than your intuition and your sense about the thing, is there any kind of evidence that supports that view, you know, that you saw particularly throughout all of the years of Obama's period, that they just wouldn't support him because he was black? Is there evidence for that?
I don't think it's that. I don't think it's just, I don't support him because he's black. That, I don't think that's how racism works. I don't think that's how bias works. I don't think that's how bigotry works. I think it works at a much different level than that. And no, I really do think that there was accusation about he was not born here. The whole birther thing that Trump was so much behind is an othering, and it was trying to get at the fact that people should see him as an other. And it wasn't other on the political spectrum, and it wasn't
not
other,
American,
not us. And this leads me into this question about this is where I think George Will, who helped me, and back when I used to vote for Republicans, George Will was really helpful to me. I like the way he thought about things. So George Will has this statement that I'm not asking you to have to argue against or defend or anything, but he did it. He wrote it in an article, in a opinion piece in the Washington Post, and then I heard him say what I'm about to quote on that liberal rag, MSNBC. Back when Microsoft used to be in the news business. Isn't that funny to think that it's still Microsoft NBC? That was the partnership between Microsoft and NBC. So George Will says this, and I'm reading the quote that I wrote down. He says, "These people are not conservatives, and to their credit, they don't claim to be conservatives. So these people who want to make America great again, they are," here's this killer quote, "they are importing continental European ethno-tribal blood and soil right-wingery, which is not just not the founders' version, it's the antithesis of the founders' version. Therefore, those that are sailing under the flag of Make America Great Again are actually trying to make America into something it never was and shouldn't be." Now, there are a couple of phrases in there that now I've been hearing over the last 4 days more often, and that's this argument about blood and soil.
Yeah.
There's a European argument going, like what Donald Trump got swept up in is also what's happening in Brexit. That's why they brought the Brexit guy over, right? It's the same thought group that, you know, I'm talking about, that guy in from England who
Cambridge Analytica.
What's that?
Are you talking about the Brexit data group?
No, the Brexit guy, the person who was...
Oh, Johnson?
Yes, I can't remember his name. But anyway, the Trump campaign brought him over
Johnson.
and cheered him up. Like they were making a connection between Brexit and the Trump people. And Brexit and other things happening in other parts of Europe, some of the pulling away in Spain and other places, is built around this idea of this notion of blood and soil. Are you in the bloodline or were you born on this soil? That's how we're going to form our nation. And George Will, a conservative, left Republican Party over its willingness to endorse Donald Trump, says, look, that's the argument that's being had. Now, interestingly, this morning, George W. Bush gave a speech where he talked about the same thing, said the same set of words. He didn't say the continental European ethno-tribal, but he said this idea
That'd
of...
be a big word for him.
Can you imagine how he would have butchered that one? That would have been fantastic.
Ethno-tribal.
Tribalism. But this notion of blood and soil right-wingery, this idea that there's a right wing, and this is what stirs up the right wing American nationalists and the white nationalists, and all this is that notion. So I don't think you've come to Trump through that lens. My question for you as a Trump supporter is, do you think that's a legitimate, do you think other people did? And do you think the pushback of conservatives like George Will and people like me who are saying that's what's driving this thing that you call cultural values, this thing that you say are, he's just digging deep on the flag and he's just digging deep on Merry Christmas and not saying things about soldiers that died, for 4 weeks, but then saying things about the NFL. Like that is not just, happening because he's not paying attention. That comes out of a whole worldview. And this is what I'm getting at with Obama. It's not that someone says, I'm a racist, he's black, I'm white, I don't like black guys. It's not how it works. It works in a notion of othering people into a different space and place. Do you think that's a legitimate, the alt-right American nationalist people say, Donald Trump is our guy, we heard him say it, this is our time? I don't think that's you. That is not Adam Schindler at all. I want to make that perfectly clear. I'm not suspecting that. But do you think that's a real thing? And do you think people like me who worry about that should be worried about it? Because you share with them being a Trump supporter, even though you've gotten there by a different argument. All right, that was really long, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in there.
There's a lot, yeah.
Yeah,
So
a lot of
respond
topics
to it or answer it either way you want.
Yeah. So, a couple things about George Wilson and Bush. I mean, these guys are establishment Republicans that Trump, blew up their party. So it's not surprising that, George is unhappy with Trump, and he's been pretty outspoken and vocal about that. That's a whole nother separate comment about why and how. As it relates to the blood and soil thing, I think that going to altright.com and this is hard, right? Especially because that the NSA and Google are watching, like clicking on altright.com and going in reading, watching their videos, maybe do private browsing so YouTube doesn't store your video watch history before you do it.
You don't think much of those people, do you?
No, I know the kind of tracking that we do. Yeah. So going and looking and reading that and trying to get an understanding about what they actually think from them as a primary source, I think is a vital piece of this puzzle. It's a painful and difficult one for many, and I completely understand why many people don't do that. But I think that to understand the alt-right and to understand blood and soil and what that means to them, you would need to go and check out primary sources and hear directly from them. There's a bountiful amount of information surrounding that.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating or endorsing that information, but I am endorsing the fact that if you want to understand someone, read their primary sources.
But are you, okay, this is going to sound really combative. You're not endorsing it, but are you standing opposed to it? Or are you saying, well, there's good people on both sides of that thing. Who knows? There might be some blood and soil types that, you really got to be a little careful before you make a judgment about that.
Yeah, I'm not in the position where I need to weigh in on, from a place of authority, on terrorist events or painful events that happen in our nation. I'm answering the first part of the question and setting a framework, which is if you want to understand someone, read the primary sources. Okay. And if all you know about the alt-right is what the Huffington Post says about them, then you probably don't understand them.
What about Wikipedia? What if I read the Wikipedia article?
Yeah, well, I mean, Wikipedia is free open journalism sourced by multiple people, so that's good. But to answer the blood and soil question, to the best of my understanding, because I texted you earlier in the day and just said, this white nationalism question has not been part of my my wheelhouse for years, like a lot of the other things we've been talking about. I have been reading it, and I do think I can make a comment in regards to what people are thinking about as it relates to immigration.
Oh.
Because the blood and the soil piece is oftentimes, particularly in Europe, and the Brexit vote had a great deal to do with people's perceived threat. And this could be a discussion about whether it's a real threat or a not threat, or what are the facts on the ground, how do you piece this together? But there was a tremendous perceived threat of people that their country, the country with their shared cultural values, they believed was being transformed through integration, through the open policies of the European Union, into something that they didn't value. Not because they didn't like the other people, in so much as that this other population group was making it difficult for them to continue on in the peaceful things that they valued themselves. And that people that were frustrated with the American policy and immigration, the U.S. policy immigration, particularly surrounding our southern border, it wasn't that we were afraid of another culture, but that there is a perception, and I tend to agree in this capacity, that there is a threat towards the peaceful expression of American Christian, what has in some capacities been identified as a white male culture, that there is a belief that that culture is fundamentally bad, that it's wrong, that it's a patriarchal culture that's condemning, and by its very existence, it damages the United States and it damages people around it just because it is. And to the degree that, that people believe that that's true about white culture, that's the response, I think, and some of the deeper motivation behind people saying, look, we just want to preserve a non-violent, peaceful culture that we value, not being, angry and fighting other people, but just we don't want to be encroached upon and have the things that we value legislated away from us. Like we can't even say Merry Christmas in the stores, and we have to spend our tax dollars to do these kinds of things.
So walk me through because I think that was great. I think you showed you understand the argument, even though you don't agree with it, about white male culture. Can I just caveat, and then I want to ask you a question about that? The notion that white society, or that American white society, is also male white supremacist society, that's the argument. I don't think the argument is, has the United States been organized around white culture? It was embedded in the founding documents of the country. I mean, of course it was. We've tried to outgrow it. We've tried to expand beyond it. And any time that seemed to infringe on rights of other peoples, we wanted to walk away from it, not deeper into it. So this idea that, sure, it has been here, but we don't want it here, has been the trajectory of the United States. And it feels to some of us like,
what's the it here? So
the white dominant narrative, because the white dominant narrative has always been a bastardizing of the American expression. It's never been a fully white culture, even though some of our documents institutionalized white power, white male landowners, this sort of thing. That kind of an approach, we have said, did not match the lived experience, and we do not want to match the lived experience going forward. So this idea that there was something in this country that we're doing away with, I would say is true, but that's not doing away with the American history or the American culture. That's doing away with a bastardization of the American culture that really is being forced by certain people that are carrying white supremacist ideas that have never been accepted in this country and never should have been. So that's a little caveat to that. That's where I would go with that argument.
Yeah. Well, and I would want to try and understand if you feel like there's a difference between white nationalism and white supremacy. Are those interchangeable words for you?
No, they're not. They're not interchangeable words. But they share enough that the parts that are scary to me about white supremacy culture, there's enough of that in the white nationalism as has been expressed in the 20th and early 21st century. That makes me extremely uncomfortable with it, because I think it's a lot of linguistic game playing for people to run undercover.
Is there, can I ask a couple of questions about this? Because I've generally been wondering, like, as I understand it, and there are, I'm sure, dozens, if not hundreds of other layers on top of this of very, very negative, bad stuff that I don't associate with the alt-right. I don't spend time reading or agreeing with that stuff. I have read it to understand it, but at the very base level, and this is what I'm always trying to do, like what's a core key principle that I can try and at least understand the motivation? And part of what I gathered from that was what I expressed is there's a perceived threat on a cultural identity that the desire to have a peaceful expression of that cultural identity is now being infringed upon. And the general question is, do you think that if you have a cultural identity that doesn't infringe upon the rights or the freedoms of other people, is it okay to want to preserve that with nonviolent means? Is it okay to want to preserve that if you feel like people are encroaching upon you? Is it an okay thing that I want to say, look, this is how I do my life, and I don't want you to come and tell me that I can't live my life if I'm not hurting somebody or if I'm not encroaching on their personal freedoms. Is that an okay thing to believe?
Yes, it is. For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so then the question of degrees, right? So
well,
how then does my personal life infringe? How does my white, patriarchal, male-dominated American history infringe upon the rights of other people to live their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness?
yeah, because a statement like, hey, white people just want to live in towns where there's just white people. Why can't they do that? That could at one level be, yeah, why is that a big deal? Well, because that's racist. And we've decided we are not going to allow you to do that in this country. We have made determinations about what we can do and what we can't do. And that's part of the republic. And people are reneging on that deal. They are moving back on that. And these determinations have been made. We've decided we're a federal system. We have decided it's not a series of states. We've decided that you can't use racism. You cannot use sexism. You cannot use ethnocentrism as the rationale for how you're going to organize civil society. We've decided it. It's been decided. And that people want to push back on that and say, well, that's something that I think maybe we should relook at that. No, we're not going to relook at that. That was my argument back. And I feel like Donald Trump sent a whole bunch of messages of saying, we might look back at that. I think people were hearing, because, and this, I've heard them say it, I've watched their videos and read their articles. I think he's saying that it's going to be okay again. And the way that, I don't want to be pointing that it's going to be okay for us to start to create some white enclaves in this country again.
Okay, so to have all white neighborhoods and get everyone non-white out.
Yeah, or white states or cities like Portland was, in 18 or 1930, whatever it was, right? Or blue law or sunset laws or what, however it's played out over the number of years. That's been the imagination of a whole bunch of people, and they talked about it in Florida today, right? Spencer was down there giving a speech. That's what they're talking about. So and I'll tell you, I think that this is a much bigger deal in all of this than I believe that you do, which is, I think, just a statement of noticing. I'm not saying you have to care about this, but in the same way that last week,
I care about it. I mean, it's
fired up around, Hillary Clinton's emails, and I'm just like, oh, Hillary Clinton's emails again. Like, I don't care. I don't think you don't care about
what's national security. I agree.
But I'm on fire because I think this is what sits at the center. This is my fear, that at the center of what is passed by under the guise of, I wish Trump would stop with all the culture war stuff. I wish Trump would stop with putting so much sort of vitriol that just seems disproportionate every time there's an issue of someone of color in this country. It rings so differently. But he's just 70, or he's just not his thing, or like. I feel like there's something so much deeper in that, or even the question, was his birther thing really just about Barack Obama being a Democrat? I don't think so. I think it's rooted in something deeper. And I think a lot of people saw that. And I think the thing that wound up a whole bunch of people and got them excited, I don't think this is true of Adam Schindler, but of a whole lot of people, was this expression that he is now. And the problem I have at multiple levels is so many Christian people seem to be rallying around this. That's what's terrifying to me.
Are you saying that Christians are rallying around wanting to create white enclaves like an entire city of Portland? Like, that's what Christians are rallying around?
No, I'm saying that Christians rallying around the cultural touch points. We're not allowed to say Merry Christmas anymore. Nonsense. Is all baked into the idea that whatever happened to the white America that we knew and loved. That's the shared argument that I think is going on. So I'm not saying that white Christians are necessarily saying we want to have enclaves like the white nationalists are saying or the white supremacists are saying. I'm saying there's such overlap. That the same cultural forces that go to one extreme in nationalism and supremacy is the same kind of thing that plays out in these other culture arguments about how much can the government really have control over what we say, do, or how we live, or how we behave. That question of, isn't it fine if I just live my life and let everybody else live their own life? that in some ways can be rooted in the same question of, hey, get the government off my back and don't tread on me. And I'm going to say something inflammatory here, and the South will rise again. Those three things are not as far away from each other, at least in my fearful imagination, as I wish they were.
Yeah.
Okay, could be, and here's why. I don't want to be too pushy on this, but you had this really great sort of question about, can't people just like create their own sense of their life and not have other people tell them what to do? And then the last thing you said in there was, like saying Merry Christmas, which we can't do anymore. Okay, the government is not involved in telling people not to say Merry Christmas. So the thing I don't get about this argument is, at one point you're saying the government should not be telling us how we need to think, behave, and act. Point taken. Next point, the government should support and make it more possible and more common for people to say Merry Christmas. So on the one hand, don't tell us what to do, think, and act. The other is, we're going to say Merry Christmas in this country again because I'm the president. He said it today, and he said it in the campaign, and you just said it. How are those things linked?
That isn't what I said. I'm starting to run into the spot where you're making lots of arguments at once, and then they're not quite what I've been saying, and I'm having a hard time responding to them. I did not say that that the government needs to let us say. What I don't want to have happen is these lawsuits and things that people are attacking Christian symbols on public land or on private land in the middle of the Mojave Desert and violently attacking them and creating lawsuits to try and tear them down because it's offensive. Or public or private spaces, commercial spaces that put up Merry Christmas and they get attacked and lawsuits get brought to not have that say and to not allow that kind of free expression in private spaces. Like, I'm not saying that the government needs to mandate that we are allowed to say it. What I'm saying is get the government off this litigation and this offense from people that want to say Merry Christmas. That stuff has gone on.
Is the government suing someone for Merry Christmas?
Litigious culture that people bring offense. Okay. And then they take their offense and then they bring it into the courts, and then what I consider to be a number of activist courts don't rule on the side of religious liberty. They rule on the side of private citizens attacking other private citizens for their free speech on personal property, and they require them to take it down. And the government has authority inside of the federal courts and the federal court districts and inside of the Department of Justice to enforce federal law at the state level. So I think the government ought to get more involved in enforcing constitutional mandates for activist federal judges as it relates to religious liberties. And I can bring an entire list of pending previous cases for that.
Okay, that's great. Okay, I'm with you there. The role of the federal government we're really in the weeds now. The role of the federal government to enforce federal statutes on federal cases as it pertains to the Justice Department is one thing. A private company getting grief or having an employee sue because of religious pressure, it's not related to the federal government. And someone like
until it's brought in front of a federal court because it gets appealed and it gets up to that. Not everyone has that. I'm talking about specific cases.
Okay, but you know, and we all know that there's a separation of powers between the judicial branch and the executive branch. I'm all for the argument about what do we do at the judicial level about how we're going to adjudicate our laws. How that's connected to vote for this president and you're going to be able to say Merry Christmas again, which he said and other people have said, that's the part that feels to me like it's so incongruent. It's so not what the president does. It's such a violation of the very constitutional rights that I know you support so much. That's the part that confuses me and that keeps me in this really nervous place, that there's this other cultural norming that's happening around a grievance against the federal government because people are feeling like their white culture is changing and being taken from them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really want to understand that from you, Doug, because I don't spend any time worrying about that. And I know that you're a smart guy and you've got a major compassionate heart and you're in a different conversation than me. And if that kind of stuff is actually going on, then that is concerning to me, that people would other somebody to the degree that it could lead their heart and their minds into such a place of division and hatred that they would want to create an enclave and completely other somebody based on their skin color or their culture. I genuinely want to learn about how that is and how that's going on. And it sounds a little bit to me like you're saying that Trump isn't outrightly saying that, but he's sort of like a gateway supremacist. I mean, his language and his cultural rhetoric is the beginning stage of a slippery slope into all out, white supremacy.
This is like episode 5 already. Yes, I think you've understood me. I think that's, I would say, I wouldn't put quite the bit about a slippery slope on there. I think the phrase a lot of people use that I agree with is the term dog whistle, meaning that it's at a pitch, that some people hear different messages in there. And all I'm telling you is, I know because I've listened to the nationalists and supremacists say, this is our time because Donald Trump. This is the argument they are making. So the idea that you're saying to me,
what time is it though?
So wild-eyed, I'm not even I agree. I would have said to you 5 years ago, I think that would be really stretching it if we ever got to the point. They're saying this stuff on a regular basis. So I don't think it's just my liberally bent conspiracy theory that says these people are hearing from Donald Trump something that is really terrifying.
Yeah, and I definitely, I've listened to some of their messaging as well in an effort to understand that. So, I definitely, yes, they are saying this is our time, and they're excited and supportive in larger numbers of President Trump. And he, certainly doesn't want to alienate anyone that voted for him. I definitely know that that's a capacity, or that's a reality. But as you understand it, because you seem to have done, this is more of a focal point for you.
That's right.
Because for you, right, Trump is a dog whistler that's galvanizing and organizing a white nationalist, that there's some fear and some belief that underneath the white nationalism is genuine white supremacy, and that he's galvanizing and organizing these people to rise again and be able to create the kind of culture that they can have their own particular enclaves. Is that this is our time for us to rise again and take back our cities and have white cities? Or what is the now is the time to do what thing?
I don't know. It's probably like, white rural areas, not our cities. No, I'm not trying to be as deist as that. What I'm saying is that on the continuum of the white nationalists and supremacists that are saying this is our time and people who are going to hear us and we're going to protect our culture, that whole argument that I think we both would agree people are making that argument who hold those positions, that is a part of a ethno-tribal, blood and soil right-wingery approach that also embeds in it this really toxic kind of national Christian culturalism that back in the 70s stirred its head up in the Republican Party and had to be dealt with, showed up in 1996 when Bob Dole at the convention said, anybody who's thinking basically what we just described here, the door is right there, head out the back. The same thing that came up when John McCain had that microphone at that rally. It happened to be in Minnesota, so I paid a lot of attention to it. And that woman said to him, I've heard that Barack Obama is a Muslim once, and he took the mic back and said, no, he's a good man. We're not doing that. That's not what this is about. Those pushbacks that have had to happen inside the Republican and conservative parties, and William Buckley had to push really hard and make a decision. Do you let these, tribal, ethno-tribal, blood and soil right-wingeries in? That thing continued, and this time it didn't get shut down. That's what I'm saying. I'm not even saying Donald Trump came up with it. I'm saying this has been around For the entirety of this country, it's been put down a number of times, and this time it wasn't. And that is something that I think has been too deeply connected and utilized by people who hold the same faith that you and I hold. And that terrifies me. And so I guess, I mean, you're not asking for my advice, but I would just say, as a Trump supporter, look over to that wing, wherever that is, and pay attention to what's over there, because I think it carries more weight. And people would say, well, I'm not quite them, but you know, they do make a point, which is why some of us just went crazy when Trump said there's good people on both sides. That's the very thing we're talking about, instead of this like he would say to the football player, fire that son of a bitch and get him off the field. Boom. We know that's Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not the guy who says there's good people on both sides. Look at the nuance. What was going on there? That's why a bunch of us freaked out about that. So that's the point I'm making. I'm not suggesting, that there's going to be, that Portland is going to return to its, or that the city I live in is going to return to its sunset laws or anything like that. But that's been the history, and that's from which it's come.
Okay, that's helpful to me. And I think, since we're not shying away from sensitive topics on this podcast, the question then is, I mean, it would be interesting for me, and I'm definitely going to go and do this, and I'm going to go and look through American history at some of these things that you mentioned, and the way that race, and particularly not just the color of the skin, but the values of a different ethnicity or culture that came in and threatened. Because I personally think the racism today that gets talked about, it's not a keen racism. It's not the kind of racism where people say that I don't like you because I'm judging you on the color of your skin and not the content of your character. Racism seems to me to be more about power structure and, social democratic socialism or some Marxist ideologies than color of the skin. It's about a cultural power structure that needs to be undone. That's a giant tangent. But in some capacities, then the question is, well, I know for a lot of conservative Christians, they are very concerned about what they consider to be a radical Islamic threat. Mm-hmm. And that the immigration, particularly as it related to the proposed ban on Muslims, and looking at identifying, and this is where Trump was, and I think he did a very bad job of implementing it. I think it's a very difficult question to stop and say, and look at the state of where we are and where terrorism has been in the United States and overseas, and to begin to ask the question, how much does people's belief in a religious ideology or a political ideology hijacked by religion over the last 30 years influence the behavior, and how much is the immigration from Middle Eastern countries where there are people that have radical Islamic beliefs that want to kill Americans for the very sake of them being American.
Yeah.
Like that's the major concern surrounding the immigration, and it was a linchpin in the Brexit vote. And I think that rather than us trying to protect our white culture, there's a concern that there's another culture, particularly radical Islamic terrorism, and particularly a fundamentalist view of the role of Sharia law that would replace the U.S. Constitution, that bringing that into America and giving that a cultural megaphone is something that we want to resist. And that is part of the galvanizing surrounding the Trump message as it relates to that issue in particular. Other than that, I abhor the KKK stuff and some of that footage that was coming out, from Virginia, and I mean all of that stuff is I can't even fathom that people are still thinking in that capacity. But I understand the concern about radical Islamic terrorism, the confusion surrounding the wars in the Middle East, and what we see around the globe today with radicalized Islam.
Yeah. Okay. As long as we're now over time and have gone at it like this, can I do a little? Do you have a minute for a little pushback on that?
Yeah.
It sounds like what you're saying is, well, the bigotry held against the people that used to be feared in this country, slave revolts, Jewish people, Irish. That's ridiculous. We should set that aside. Anybody who's still making that argument, not worth listening to. But the new one, Islamic fear, that one is legitimate again.
Yeah.
There's other people who are saying,
yeah, I understand.
Very thing that showed us that those biases that we had against those other groups, it's the same thing. It's not, well, boy, I'm glad we're done with thinking that, Jews were going to overthrow the country, or the Japanese were going to be a real problem in internment camps. So that's what it feels like, right? Well, we have a good reason for this one. And then people like me will say, look at the modern day terrorism and what has happened in this country. And boy, if you want to see a thing, look at the amount of domestic terrorism that is pushed on this country by white men. And you look at the number of shootings that have happened. And yes, are you kidding me? Yes.
The white male domestic terrorism is greater than any kind of Islamic radicalized terror that we've seen.
In this country, yes.
That's a bigger threat.
In this country, the number of people killed in those kinds of and the number of activities is, yes, I would say yes.
We're gonna.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's okay. Fair enough. We will table that one until somebody Wikipedia articles something to us.
That's something statistics and some research can help us with.
Yes, because it's clear. And I'll just say that the notion that we now have a different kind of racism that isn't built on color or race, that just does not match the penalties and imprisonment and police treatment and shooting of particular people in this culture. It's just not possible that the statistics are as off as they are and as frequent as they are for black males in this culture to be imprisoned or shot by the police, and have it not be related to a deep down fear of race or color. I think that's my opinion.
We need to look at those statistics, and if it's about fear of race or color, is it a white male police officer shooting a black African American person? What are the statistics surrounding the police that get into altercations compared to the other kind of altercations? I mean,
yeah, right. I mean, all those things, like even the fact that you could say, well, yeah, they keep doing criminal things, but both of us who know officers know. No, I mean, somebody could make that argument that lots of people do, that if people are going to have more contact with the police, they're going to have more chances for altercations. That's the very point I'm making.
Right. And we ought to do something about the culture that has left. I mean, the African American male in the inner city, out on its own, without a family, without a support structure, without access to resources. I think that's a tremendous problem that needs to be addressed, that drives people. Ultimately, everyone makes a choice, but you get handed a very difficult situation, and we need to address what's going on in the urban centers of this nation, specifically relates to the plight of young African-American males.
We do, and I'll tell you, and I'm new to this knowledge, so it's going to be a little bit off the cuff, but when you compare including the role of poverty, the numbers of black men who are not engaged in their families is no higher than white men that are not engaged in their families when you take into account poverty. So there is, and I'm not saying that, I mean, I believe this, I said something very similar to this a while back, and this is where I was corrected by someone who said, that's the kind of narrative that has continued to be pushed in this country that does not match the actual facts when you take into account people who are living in poverty. So you take into poverty is the great equalizer. In other words, if you're living in poverty, this is the kind of thing that tends to happen. It's not specific to black culture or even to urban centers. The same thing is happening in rural and suburban areas when you take poverty into consideration. It's just there's a lot going on in our country that are, as you said, would you say there's layers of this, 10 layers or 100 layers or something? I think that's all very true. There's a lot going on, but there's also some built-in biases about in this society, in this culture. That I'm not saying Barack Obama did a great. I'm not an advocate for his work in this, but what it feels to me, and this is why it's particularly hard for someone like me to see how people could support Trump, is that it feels like the current president of the United States is not moving in the same direction as the previous presidents on these issues. It feels like the same disruption that he brought to the political system is happening to this agreed upon set of expectations and norms.
So Obama did better on race relations than.
No, what I would say is
Trump's only got 8 or 9 months in under him, but we got 8 years of Obama's policies, and the plight of the African American male. Where are they?
Yay, touche.
Under 8 years of Obama. So
no, and
I'm tempted to do an outro and take the last word this week. So thanks for listening, everybody.
Good night, Internet. Thank you, my friend. We'll be back on next week, if the creeks don't rise and all those things. All right, everybody, thanks. Hey, if you want to keep up on all of this, it's on my webpage, dougpadgett.com, which is also a place on Patreon where if you want to chip in to help make all this possible, I'd love that. And if you follow Adam on Facebook, or if you don't already, if you follow Adam's blog, adamschindler.com, right?
That's it. Yeah. And I got some high quality recordings of the stuff on YouTube as well.
Yeah, really good recordings. So it's in lots of those places. And if you're talking to each other about all of this, I don't know that we're the best examples in the world, but I think, friends, you know our spirit, and our spirit is that we want to know and listen to and understand each other so that we can say it the way the other person would. So they would say, "You made my point. Thank you. That's really good." And then from there, agreement and extending each other's beliefs can happen. So
yeah, and then we understand why exactly you're wrong, and it's better.
That's right. All right. Hey, thanks, buddy. All right.
Yeah. Good night.
All right, we're off the live stream, at least as far as I can tell. I'm going to stop the recording too.